Ben Avraham, who's a friend of mine that got diagnosed with a cancerous melanoma in his eye. And we're just davening that he A, doesn't lose the eye, and B, doesn't get cancer in the brain. So just
for him, yeah.
Yeah. If you want to teach us.
Can you hear me, guys? The connection is not good here.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go here. What's going on here? 1 second. Sorry about this, guys. Why hadn't I? Oh, there we go. Okay, let's go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. It says, okay, something different here. Adding Tosefet Shabbos, which is adding on to Shabbat and Yom Tov. Both okay at the beginning and the end, but adding to, okay, so if one begins Shabbos before it's before Bein Hashmashot, which is I think dusk Bein Hashmashot, in the following ways, you could say, I hereby accept Shabbat, or by answering Baruch Hu at Mariv. These are the way how you accept Shabbat. Answering Baruch Hu at Mariv, and when the community says Mizbor Lashir Layom Shabbat or Boye Kala in I think the Chadodi. The universal thing is to accept Shabbos at this time. However, community may decide not to accept Shabbos then. A woman accepts Shabbos when she lights the Shabbos candles. Accepting Shabbos mentally without any verbal statement, according to the Ramah, is not considered a valid acceptance of Shabbos. However, the Vilna Gaon and Chaya Adam all state that such an acceptance is binding if it's mentally in your mind. Mentally, okay. The earliest time that one can accept Shabbos, according to Shulchan Aruch, is from sunset. Okay, one can accept Shabbos already from Plag HaMincha, 1.25 halachic hours. Sorry, I'm looking at my phone here. 1.25 hours before Shabbos comes in. One who is unsure when sunset is should accept Shabbos. Should accept Shabbos at the normal time. Okay, so the print, it's gone on to another page, but I'm assuming that's what it is. So forget that last point. I don't know what, there's a page that I scanned, but I'm looking at my phone here. So okay. I would say that. Okay. Okay, guys, that's all
right, guys, I tell you what I need to do. I need to do two things. I've got a goal in mind because our pacing has been terrible. I think people have been very sick and non-concentrating, and everybody hasn't been well. Both you and Arthur, Kevin, have had accidents. Gavin's had COVID. I've had colon issues with a surgeon. We all not in a fitter state, but I want to get back to the goal. But there is something I have to add to the shiur tonight, and then I want for a shiur the full 40 minutes tonight, because I know we can cover half a daf. And otherwise we're going to be stuck on this forever. And I want us to know that there is some sort of satisfaction of completion with Bava Kamma. There's a lot to do. I don't know if you know, Arthur, you don't have to go on, I know you're riding. There is Pesach Sheni from tonight until tomorrow night. Now, I didn't know that much about Pesach Sheni. So I'd like to read to you what I learned. Do any of you know what Pesach Sheni actually is? Because I don't know. I heard at Shul tonight that it was Pesach Sheni from tonight until tomorrow night. I didn't even know what it is, really. I've heard of it once, twice.
Yeah, and I heard it's a custom to have a piece of matzah as well.
Yeah. So, exactly. So let me just tell you what it's about, because Arthur, this has been a learning curve for me. You might know about it, but honestly, it's so funny. You can be from for years, know Blatter Gomorrah, know this, but in other ways, I'm totally ignorant. You know, in terms, there's some guys at the shul that are amazing. They know the order of the laning. They know what does what. When you do this, I just, you know, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. So I'm just reading from the Wikipedia here, guys. Pesach Sheni, second Passover, occurs every year on the 14th of Iyar, which is tonight and tomorrow. So we're now counting. Tonight is today. Obviously, tonight is the 28th day of the Omer. And it's exactly 1 month after the 14th of Nisan. So the day before Passover, which was the day prescribed for bringing the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. In other words, the Passover lamb, in anticipation of that holiday. So as described in the source text for this mitzvah, in Numbers chapter 9, verse 1 to 14, the Israelites were about to celebrate Passover 1 year after leaving Egypt. Now, I also didn't realize that it was actually that they celebrated it 1 year after, but obviously at that point it's prescribed as a proper chag. And the offering of the Korban Pesach was at the core of that celebration. However, certain men were ritually impure from contact with human corpses and were therefore ineligible to participate in the Korban Pesach. I remember Jeff Kaplan talking about this. And faced with the conflict of the requirement to participate in the Korban Pesach and the ineligibility due to impurity from touching human corpses, they approached Moshe and Aaron for instructions, which resulted in the communication of the laws of Pesach Sheni. Okay? So eligibility, as described in Numbers chapter 9, verse 9 to 13, a Jew may bring the Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni if he or she were ritually impure due to contact with a dead body or was on a distant journey, as elucidated in Mishnah Pesachim chapter 9, verse 1 to 4, and its Gemara. So what's the definition of a distant journey? It generally is construed liberally as being obviously unable to come back in time. All types of ritual impurity are generally included, not just those due to contact with a human body, but specifically at the time at which this occurred in the Chumash, it was due to burials, etc. In net effect, anybody unavoidably prevented from offering the Korban Pesach on Passover may do so on Pesach Sheni. However, one may not intentionally defer the Korban Pesach in his or her power to offer it on Passover. So in other words, you can't use it as an excuse if you can actually do it at the ideal time. So similarities and differences compared to Pesach. The Mishnah, chapter 9, verse 3, in Pesachim and the Gemara outline the following similarities and differences in the laws of the Korban Pesach when it's offered in Pesach Sheni compared to when it's offered on Passover. So what is the things they've got in common? Well, the particulars of the sacrifice itself, what animals can be used, that must be roasted, that it must be eaten together with matzah and bitter herbs, that the bones cannot be broken, that it's eaten until midnight, that any leftovers must be burnt. Hallel is recited during its offerings. Offerings override Shabbat prohibitions. Only those previous registered prior to slaughter may partake. What makes it different to the actual Passover? The only restriction concerning chametz, leavened food, is that it cannot be eaten with the Korban Pesach. It is otherwise permissible to own it and to see it in plain sunlight unlike on Passover. So guys, that was interesting, is that obviously it's still out of respect. We can't have chametz eaten with the Korban Pesach, but you can still own it and see it even, unlike on Pesach. More generally, the full 7-day Chag HaMatzot, Festival of Unleavened Bread, the holiday now commonly referred to as Pesach, is not observed in conjunction with Pesach Sheni. Well, that we know, it's a month apart. Hallel is not recited at the meal when the Korban Pesach is consumed, unlike on Passover. I didn't know that. So what's the bottom line in modern times in terms of observance? Due to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, Jews are unable to perform the Pesach sacrifice, nor guys, it's the same in Passover. You can't do it, and that's why many people don't put a lamb shank. They put like a chicken neck, etc., specifically because of that, on the plate when they display the maror, etc. So you can't do that on Passover. You can't do that on Pesach Sheni unless you had the Beis HaMikdash. So some are accustomed to eat matzahs during Pesach Sheni in memory of the sacrifice. Not everybody, Gavin, it's a minhag, but you can. Others say that the reason for eating matzah is because the 14th of Iyar was the day that matzah that was taken out of Egypt was finished. Some have accustomed to omit tachanun from the daily prayer services, though this custom is not observed universally. Pesach Sheni is relatively prominent in Chabad, as well as in Hasidic thought. One theme commonly expressed this holiday is a concept of second chances, both for Teshuvah, which the Rebbe obviously conducts a tish. So you'll see many droshas about Teshuvah and second chances about missing the opportunities, because that's what it was. It was a second chance of them being able to observe Pesach. So the Rebbes of Nadvorna and related groups conducted a tish with 4 cups of wine even, matzah and maror, in the manner of a seder. All right, so guys, that was a bit of a news flash to me.
And off to us as well.
Or a sheep and guys, whose computer's making that noise? All right, let's start again. The noises. All right. So, all right, guys, the Gemara cites the clause of the Mishnah that reads, we're on the 71st daf, if one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered it on Yom Kippur, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. We obviously know it's a little bit of a shock, because we would have thought if you slaughtered it on Yom Kippur, it's a death sentence. It's not. It's just malchus. Malchus, which is lashes. Malchus is kingship. So let me just use the English word lashes, because for my pronunciation of Hebrew alone, I should get lashes. All right. So, Malchus is kingship, and Malkut, or Malchus, is lashes. Instead of the it's the kuf. So
quite a fine line, eh? You're either getting lashes or you're getting kingship. It's quite a big difference.
It's a very fine line. Okay. The Gemara asks, and it says, why is one who slaughters a stolen animal on Yom Kippur liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment? Because granted, there's no court-imposed death penalty for desecrating Yom Kippur. There is kares, and that works obviously in conjunction with an earth sentence of lashes. Okay? And it's accepted by us that one does not receive lashes and pay money for the same crime, because we've got Kimle B'di Rabba Minneh, which, as Kevin asked quite succinctly, well, what does that in fact actually mean? So it means that by virtue of the fact if there are 2 payments that are required, the more stringent payment is given and the lesser payment is waived. So we said that if there's a death penalty and financial payment incurred by the same act at the same time period, like you kill somebody but you damage their property, one gets the death penalty, but you don't have to pay for the damage of property. If one, for example, broke Shabbos with witnesses and everything else and burnt the guy's Picasso, you don't have to pay back the guy's Picasso because the guy gets the death penalty. Now, we also learned, again, bottom line, is that even something that is subject to Kimle B'di Rabba Minneh, but it doesn't actually result in Kimle B'di Rabba Minneh, is also counted. For example, in Sanhedrin, where a thief broke into somebody's home, it's likely that the homeowner, if he gets caught or kill him. So therefore his life's in danger. So if he broke the barrel while his life was in danger, he doesn't have to pay back the homeowner for the broken barrel of wine. So to here, with the case of the figs and having to sell a carcass that he stole, in that case, he even if he's eligible by picking the all that fruit in return for the carcass, it's unlikely that the buyer who's buying a carcass illegally would have witnesses around him. But just because that Sabbath desecration deliberately is liable to the death penalty, the Kimle B'di Rabba Minay kicks in, even if the person doesn't actually get the death penalty. So let's go on. We did this before. So it's accepted by us that one does not receive lashes and pay money for the same crime. The Gemara answers. They said, who is the author of this Mishnah? It's a Mishnah authored by Rabbi Meir, who says that one can receive lashes and pay money for the same crime. And the reason being is quite clear. The Mishnah in Makot, in the fourth daf, discusses the case of witnesses who testify that a person owes his fellow 200 zuz. And they then found out to be conspiring witnesses because a second set of witnesses said they couldn't have witnessed this event in Johannesburg because they were on holiday with the first set of witnesses in Cape Town. So they're liable to lashes for violating the prohibition in Exodus, Shemot chapter 20, verse 13, you shall not bear false witness, as well as to the reciprocal penalty decreed by the verse for Zomamim, which is Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, and you shall do to him as he conspired to do to his brother. So firstly, because for violating that prohibition, there's lashes, and for the reciprocal penalty, because they intended to get this guy to pay 200 zuz, they paid 200 zuz. But since both of them occur simultaneously, the sages would say that the Adam Zomamim get lashes, but they don't have to pay the reciprocal money for the same crime. Rabbi Meir, however, rules that they receive lashes and pay the intended victim what they sought to take away from him. Because the scriptural verse that makes him liable for lashes is not the same one that makes them liable for payment. In other words, the one in Exodus is different to the verse in Deuteronomy. So since the verses are different, the two penalties stem from two different pasukim. According to Rashi, they're entitled to make the two different penalties. The one would be lashes and the financial penalty of the reciprocal payment of 200 zuz. So here too, we say that's an example of it. Rabbi Meir would hold that the thief who slaughters a stolen animal on Yom Kippur receives lashes for desecrating Yom Kippur. But he also pays the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal. It's a different crime because the two penalties stem from the different verses. Okay, the rabbis say no, if it's from the same act, even if it's two different crimes, you only give the greater penalty. So the Gemara counters, if our Mishnah is indeed the opinion of Rabbi Meir, then even if the thief slaughtered the stolen animal on Shabbat, he should also pay the fourfold or fivefold penalty. Why then does our Mishnah rule that the thief who slaughters the stolen animal on Shabbat, that's exempt? So what it's doing is it's questioning if Rabbi Meir is the author of our is the author of our Mishnah, because in the case of Shabbat, where it says if the thief slaughters a stolen animal on Shabbat, he should be made to pay the four or fivefold penalty, or his heirs should, before he gets the death penalty, or if it's paid by the inheritors of his estate. So we're saying no, there is an exemption to the four or fivefold penalty if he slaughters the animals on Shabbos. So the Gemara is asking, well then, could it be that this Mishnah is not authored by Rabbi Meir? So the Gemara says no. Perhaps you will say in reply to this question that Rabbi Meir actually holds that one can receive lashes and pay for the same crime, but he does not hold that one can be put to death and pay for the same crime. In other words, in the case of an execution and a financial penalty, Rabbi Meir does hold by Kimle B'di Rabba Minay. We give he stands liable to the greater penalty in it, okay, than the lower penalty, okay. So that's the suggestion that's a suggestion in this case. So in other words, he does not hold that one can be executed and assessed monetarily for the same crime. But then the Gemara brings a brisa, guys. This is where we ended off last time. If one stole an ox or a sheep and slaughtered it on Shabbat, or if he stole an ox or sheep and slaughtered it for idol worship, or if one stole an ox condemned to be stoned and slaughtered it, in these cases he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So this brisa seems to contradict our Mishnah to say, because our Mishnah reads, if the thief slaughters the animals on Shabbat, there's no four or fivefold payment, which means that he holds by Kimle B'di Rabba Minei. But this brisa seems to prove that even if he slaughtered the animals for Shabbos, on Shabbos, or for idol worship, there is a four or fivefold payment. So it seems like this opinion of Rabbi Meir in the brisa contradicts his opinion if we're saying it's the Mishnah. So maybe he didn't write the Mishnah, and the Gemara is saying, no, you're not seeing the context. He wrote both the Mishnah and he wrote the brisa. So why is there a contradiction? This is where we ended off. So we say, in all these cases, he pays the four or fivefold payment. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So the brisa is teaching in this case that although the animal is slaughtered on Yom Kippur for idol worship, there's still a four or fivefold payment, which is in direct contrast to our Mishnah, in the words of Rabbi Meir, that there's no four or fivefold payment for slaughtering the animal on Shabbat. Obviously, the sages exempt him, because in all the cases, the sages say, Kimle B'di Rabba Minei. Doesn't matter if there's malchus or finances or execution and finances, etc., etc. So we want to find out the reason why. So evidently it suggests that maybe Rabbi Meir indeed holds that one who simultaneously incurs liability to the death penalty and to payment is subject to both penalties. So the Gemara says, no, don't come to that conclusion. The first conclusion is right. As far as Kimle B'di Rabba Minei, he doesn't hold that as far as lashes and financial penalty is concerned. But as far as the death penalty is concerned and financial payment, by the same simultaneous act, he holds that the greater penalty holds, even if there's two pasukim. So we learn there's a distinction in why he holds Kimle B'di Rabba Minei in the case of execution, because in the case of Makot, in the fourth daf, it's coming from two different pasukim, the one in Exodus and the one in Deuteronomy. Okay, so that's why there's lashes as well as the reciprocal payment with the items on the rim. So it's saying, don't let this brisa throw you off. There's a reason. Add the context to the brisa. So they said, leave that brisa out of the discussion, because if you want to analyze the brisa, it says, Rav Yaakov said in the name of Rav Yochanan, whereas others reported, Rav Yirmiyah said in the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish, that Rav Avin and Rav Ila and the entire group say in the name of Rav Yochanan. There are a lot of people accredited with it. The brisa is dealing with he slaughtered it through the agency of another person. So what's happening now is there's another factor in this brisa, and that factor is there's an agent that's involved in the slaughtering process. So Kevin, just again, the thief in the Mishnah was talking about the thief stole the animal and then the thief slaughtered it. Okay? But in this particular brisa, we're saying the thief stole it, but he's not a shochet, perhaps. So he wanted a ritual slaughter so that he could enjoy the meat. Now, you might turn around and say, well, how can somebody that knows thievery is wrong want to eat kosher? We've said before, people are nuts. They're mad. So you'll have somebody with kapota and kippas and everything that's still in business. But they keep Shabbos to a T. People are mad, man. They're mad. Nobody's consistent. We're all lunatics, including myself. So the thing of it is, because this is the case, he might want a proper ritual slaughter, because he holds by badatzo. He's like super kosher, but he doesn't mind stealing an animal every now and again. Or we could say the reason why he wanted a shochet is because he wanted to sell the carcass as a legitimately slaughtered animal. So if it had the hechsher, it's going to be something. The issue is, though, why would a shochet slaughter it on Shabbat? That's the difficulty. So maybe we say that he didn't have a shochet. Maybe he knew how to do a ritual slaughter. Maybe he didn't. But maybe you need another person to hold the animal down, because no animal goes willingly if there's a knife to their throat, I promise you. So you might have needed more than one accomplice. So this Bryce is talking about that through the agency of another person. So the Gemara questions this explanation of the Bryce. But can it be said that the agent sins by slaughtering the stolen animal, and this other one, the thief, is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment? So what it's actually asking is as follows. It's saying, how can it be that the thief must pay for the act of slaughter done by his agent? Because, guys, remember the principle. Ein shaliach lidbar aveira. There's no agency to commit an act of transgression. Kiddushin 42b. So, guys, that is basically a person commissioned to commit a transgression is not considered to be acting as an agent of the principle, but rather to be acting on his own. If the agent indeed carries out the transgression, it is he who is responsible for the misdeed and not the principal who commissioned him. And we all said, don't worry, in the next world, the person's going to get responsible for it. So we say there's a mafia don, and the court wants to convict him. And they say to him, but such and such a person was eliminated in a hit. And he said, listen, I never said anything to the hitman. I said, take care of the problem. I didn't tell him to kill him. I said, take care of it. Meaning beat him up. I didn't say take care of him. So in other words, the court can't convict the mafia hitman. That's how it's worked. That's why the RICO Act occurred by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, which means you could do long prison sentences by association with criminals, because there were various buffers and layers where all the dirty work was done by soldiers in the crime families, not by the capos or the consigliere or anything like that. So they were removed. The dons were removed from a lot of the dirty works and made convictions very difficult. I'm just giving you some modern context here. In Shemaim, they're responsible. Of course, they're going to cook and get in them. We know that, but that's not what we're talking about. So we're saying that what happens is you take a person, says, why did you become a hitman? No, I followed orders. Take a Nazi officer in World War II. Did you know it was wrong to murder? Yes. So you're responsible. What do you mean you were following orders? What do you mean? So that's exactly this principle. So we're saying, how can it be that a thief must pay for the act of slaughter done by his agent? That's exactly what we mean here. Because it's saying if you had an agent that did it, the thief must pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. But yet we learned in the case of the Mishnah that the thief does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Why? Because when the thief gets executed, even Rabbi Meir is saying that the financial penalty is waived because we give him the greater penalty of execution. Here the agent's done it, so therefore is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment because the thief is not executed. His agent killed the animal. But the question's going to arise, well then, if that's the case, then why do we not give the agent the 4 or 5-fold penalty or waive it because he's got Kimlei B'di Rabbi Minei? What makes a thief liable for it? That's the question. You get what I'm saying? Very straightforward. So we've got a bit of a problem either way. So the Gemara questions the explanation of the brisa. But can it be said that the agent sins by slaughtering the stolen animal, and this one, the thief, is liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment? How then can you say that the brisa, which states that the thief is liable to the 4 or 5-fold penalty, is discussing a case in which someone else slaughtered the animal for him? Okay, so the Gemara answers, Rava said, while it is true that in general one is not liable for a transgression committed by his agent, here with respect to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment, it's different. Listen to this, guys, it's very clever. For it states in the verse, in Shmot chapter 21, verse 37, okay, if a man steals an ox or sheep and slaughters it or sells it, but juxtaposing the acts of slaughtering and selling, the verse indicates a comparison between the two acts. What is the comparison? So just as a thief brings about the sale of an animal only through the involvement of another person besides himself, who's the other person? The buyer. In other words, guys, there's no sale unless there's a buyer. So in that case, a sale requires two people, a buyer and a seller, according to Rashi. Thus, it's impossible for the thief to carry out the sale without another party. Okay? So, 2, is he liable if he brings about the slaughter of his animal through another person besides himself, through this agent? So we're saying that just like a sale needs 2 parties, a buyer and a seller, Gav, you tired?
No, I'm fine. I just yawned. I'm
okay.
focused.
So just like a sale requires 2 parties, the thief that stole the animal and is selling it, it requires a buyer that's buying a stolen item. Let's look at hijacking, guys. There's no hijacking market if people don't buy stolen goods. It's a fact. So we're saying just like you need 2 parties there involved, 2 people there involved, so too with the act of slaughter, you need 2 parties involved. Apparently, maybe the one was an expert in shechita and the other one wasn't. Maybe perhaps the one needed to hold the animal and one needed to slaughter. Who knows? But in any event, it required 2 people, more than 1 person. Because we're not slaughtering chickens here. We're talking about an ox or a sheep. These things don't take kindly to knives being put to their throats. They're going to kick back. So they're saying that you can juxtaposition that there are more than 1 person involved, and therefore the case of the agency is removed because it's needed as part of the process. So the Gemara presents alternative ways of deriving a thief's liability for his agent's slaughter of the stolen animal. So the Academy of Rav Yishmael taught in a brisa, the word or is superfluous to teach us to include slaughter or sale through an agent in the law of liability for the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So it's very interesting, Kevin. You know Hebrew. It uses the word udvacho or macharo. Okay, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it. So the word English or and the word Hebrew or is basically the same. It's got an aleph and a vav with a dot on it. So it's funny that the English word and the Hebrew word is the same. So the simple meaning of the phrase is that the thief is liable if he either slaughters or sells the animal. So the word or, meaning both, this one or that one, is considered superfluous because the verse could have conveyed the same idea in one word using the word varcho, because when you use the it acts as a vav, which is a prefix to have the same meaning as or. So the fact that it wasn't using that prefix of a and it used the separate word or means it needed that extra word to teach this juxtaposition. Now, just like a thief that's selling something needs a buyer, the person that steals something to slaughter it needs an accomplice to help slaughter it. Okay? So that was the Academy of Rav Yishmael. Now there's the Academy of Chizkiah that taught in the brisa, similar concept. It uses the word instead because it uses the word tachat lerabot et hashaliach. So the word instead is used, and it's superfluous again, like the word or, to teach us to include slaughter or sale through an agent in the law of liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. In other words, let me just tell you what the verse says, because I think this helps. It says, 5 cattle he shall pay instead of the ox. So we know that that's the source, that if you steal an ox and you decide to slaughter or sell it, it says 5 cattle he shall pay instead of the ox. Now, what could it have said, guys? Instead of using the word tachat, which is instead, the Torah could have just written the word, guys, he shall pay for the ox. That's all it could have said. In other words, it could have said 5 cattle he shall pay for the ox. It didn't have to say 5 cattle he shall pay instead of the ox. That's how Rashi explains it. So again, that superfluous word instead is coming to teach, in this case, the agent himself, also the person that's involving this other second party is involved. It's not generally the case, but in this case it is. So the above answer that Rabbi Meir agrees, in this case, that one who incurs the death penalty is exempt from monetary liability incurred simultaneously. So again, Rabbi Meir agrees with Kimle B'di Rabba Minay, only with the death penalty and a financial liability incurred by the same simultaneous act at the same time, but not for lashes and monetary. And Rabbi Meir's ruling in the Brisa that a thief is liable to the fourfold of fivefold penalty when the animal was slaughtered on Shabbat is for idol worship or breaking the Shabbos, and it's only in cases where it was slaughtered through the thief's agent. Now, I'm sure, guys, you're going to expect this obvious question. And this question by Mar Zutra is perfect. He said, can there be such a thing that if he does it himself, he is not liable, yet if his agent does it, he is liable? So what he's basically saying is that if the thief himself had slaughtered it on Shabbat or for idol worship, he would not be liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment because he'd be liable to execution. Kimle B'di Rabba Minay. We only apply the greater penalty. How then can he be liable if his agent slaughters it in this manner? Because there's a rule that one cannot effect through an agent that which he could not effect personally. So that's in Kedushin 23b and the Darin 35b. Now, what did we learn? We learned that, many dafs ago, that if you get in your agent to look after your property, but you're in a different country, there's a problem because you couldn't do that remotely. Some people hold that you can have an agent if you can't do something remotely, and others say that if you can't do it yourself, then to get an agent to do it for you poses a difficulty. You really would have to be able to effect it personally. It's just that the agent does it on your behalf. Maybe the law has changed because today there are different levels of sophistication where people have people working on their behalf, but it still applies in certain fields. Say, Kevin, the medical field. The medical field, you can't take somebody's license and operate a medical practice under their license to perform surgery, unless you're a doctor yourself. You can have doctors working for you under surgical practice, but not if you're not a surgeon yourself. Does that make sense? So what it's saying here is there is a rule that one cannot effect through an agent that which he could not effect personally, and therefore, why if he does it himself is not liable, yet if his agent does it, he is liable. Okay? Because he didn't do it at the end of the day. So the Gemara answers, Rav Ashi had the solution, and Rav Ashi said to Mar Zutra, there he is exempt when he slaughters it himself, not because he's not liable, but because he's subject to the penalty greater than the payment. Okay? In other words, that in essence, he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment when he slaughters it himself. It's only because of the rule that he stands liable to the penalty greater than it, that it does not make him eligible for the actual payment, because he gets the death penalty. Okay, and then when he slaughters it through his agent and is not subject himself personally to the death penalty, that would exempt him from actual payment, but he still remains liable to the payment, technically. Okay, so in that particular case, just give me 1 second, guys. The Gemara then asks further, but if the Brisa in which Rabbi Meir rules that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment when the animal was slaughtered on Shabbat or for idol worship refers to where he slaughtered it through another person, then what is the reason of the rabbis that dispute Rabbi Meir and exempt the thief from the payment? So in other words, I'm just going to repeat this again. Rav Ashi said to Mar Zutra is that there is exempt when he slaughters it himself, not because he's not liable, but because he's subject to the penalty greater than it. Otherwise, we'd make him pay the four or fivefold payment. But if his agent slaughters it, and we learned that this is an exception where he's responsible for his agent's transgression, the agent gets the death penalty. But in this case, since the actual thief doesn't get the death penalty, he's still eligible to the four or fivefold payment. So the Gemara asks, but if the Brisa in which Rabbi Meir rules that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold penalty when the animal was slaughtered on the Sabbath, or for idol worship refers to where he slaughtered it through another person, an agent, then what's the reason that the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir exempt the thief from the payment? So it's basically saying, well, the rabbis now are being more lenient because they're saying that that even though the thief caused another person to get the death penalty, and we don't give that other person that slaughtered the animal the 4 or 5-fold payment because of the death penalty, we also exempting the thief from the 4 or 5-fold payment. And Rabbi Meir says that the thief is liable for the 4 or 5-fold payment. So we want to know what's the reason as far as that's concerned. Okay, so the Gemara answers is quite simple. Who is the author of the opinion attributed by the Brisa to the sages? So in terms of the Brisa, the author is Rabbi Shimon. And what does Rabbi Shimon said? Guys, we read this in the Mishnah. A slaughter that is not fit, that does not render the animal fit for consumption, is not termed a slaughter. So what he's saying is, look, if you remember, there were 2 cases in which Rabbi Shimon said that if it occurred, it wasn't technically considered a kosher slaughter, and therefore there's no eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Because what did we learn in our Mishnah? Guys, what did we learn in our Mishnah? It says, in all these cases, he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. Rabbi Shimon exempts him from the 4 or 5-fold payment in these last 2 cases. What was the last 2 cases? Kevin said it the other day. If he slaughters it and it's found to be a treifa, meaning the animal was going to die anyway, that's not considered a slaughter that you can get benefit from the animal. Or if he slaughters a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, then you can't get benefit from the animal. So the author of the Bryce is actually Rabbi Shimon that brings these 2 cases. But basically, if it's any of the other cases, we're saying that there isn't eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Whereas Rabbi Meir exempts the thief from the 4 or 5-fold payment, not in this case, but only in the case of Malchus, but not as far as. Okay, guys, are there any questions?
Yeah, I did actually have a question. Let me think. Isn't it a bit unfair that just because the animal's trait, you get off the hook when your intention was to kill that animal? So regardless, shouldn't you be guilty? Why should you get off the hook because you got lucky from a perspective that the animal was trait?
Okay.
Treifa, sorry.
Well, firstly, good question. The thief stole the animal in order to sell it and make money. He can't do anything with it, technically. So often what happens is the law applies to not where something is actually enforceable, but the principle of it. Like we said, Kimle Badi Rabbi Minay, even if a person doesn't get the death penalty because there were a lack of witnesses or not proper warning, he still doesn't have to have the financial payment side because that act would be eligible for Kimle Badi Rabbi Minay. And we said this in Sanhedrin. You and Ian Shapiro were going to write a book on how to get off in this world. In this world, as Rav Simcha corrected you, not in general, which means that you get off on a technicality, because why should the person get off with Kimle B'di Rabbi Minay if he wasn't executed? We say, fine, if he was executed, it's a terrible thing. So then, okay, we get the person off. Even that's difficult to understand. It's even more difficult to understand a thief who put himself in danger. And it's difficult to understand that when somebody does murder, they're almost rewarded with their getting off the financial benefit. But you can do a kapora with a greater payment. But so too here, if your intention was to sell it or slaughter it in order to make money, and that animal is rendered unfit for any Jew to eat, you haven't accomplished your act. And since you haven't accomplished your act, you can't get benefit. And also the original owner can't get the benefit because that would be even prohibited for him. So since the original owner can't get any benefit, he doesn't get the benefit of the payments, because even if he sold that, even if the animal was treifa in that particular case, he'd have a problem. Your question holds much more as far as consecrate when the animal is as far as the consecration is concerned. That's more of a question, because the original owner wouldn't have slaughtered it in the temple courtyard, because that renders it unpermissible. That's the Thief's Act. But the thief wouldn't have been able to gain any benefit from it, because as a non-consecrated animal, if you slaughter it in the temple courtyard, he can't make money from it. So since he can't make money from it, there was no sense to it, and therefore why is there a 4 or 5-fold payment? It was senseless. It's almost like if you were going to slaughter or sell an animal, but you threw it into the fire prior, you still pay, Gavin, you still pay the kefil payment. You pay the compensation for the animal you stole, and you're paying the same amount as a penalty. You're paying double. That's enough. You don't have to pay 4 or 5-fold. It's not like he's off the hook.
100%. And also, his true intention, you're right, was not just to slaughter it. It was to slaughter it and to make money, or get a benefit.
Are you still there, mate?
Oh, that's good. He winked at us.
Yay! How's it, mate? Say hello.
I'm good. I'm excited. Half asleep, but I'm excited. It's only 11:15. Don't worry, you guys, it's 10:15. Getting up at 6, but hey.
Listen,
Thanks, Arthur.
Your health is a small price to pay for Gavin's joy of watching soccer.
That's it. That's it. I'm kind of blessed by that, yeah. Listen, I hold one up on Kevin. Like, say, do you remember that time in Sicily when I was...
Who was playing, Kev?
It was the FA Cup final. Liverpool played Chelsea.
Oh, then it was worth it.
It went to a penalty shootout. That's what only finished
at the cost of Arthur's health and well-being.
No, I feel better